Gabriella arrived at the car, Jackson said, "Since I'm here, aren't you planning to show me around the village?" Gabriella was somewhat surprised. "I thought you didn't want to go there." Jackson's eyes that were looking at Gabriella darkened slightly, and he pursed his lips into a straight line. "Although I don't have any memories of this place, I can't deny that I have lived here before." Gabriella was optimistic by nature. Besides, Jackson had saved her brother today, so she could not refuse his request to look around the village. She lifted her lips into a radiant smile. "Okay, I'll go with you." It was about an hour's drive to get to the village. There were no concrete roads in the village, and it was a bumpy ride. Jackson looked at the scenery outside the window, his eyes dark. He tried to dig out something from his memory, but did not succeed. After entering the village, Jackson asked in a deep voice, "Where did I live?" "The car can't get us to where you lived. Wait for me. I'll take you there after I go home and change my clothes." The fishing village was not big, so if anything happened, everyone knew it. It was a strange thing for everyone when 4 luxurious limousines suddenly drove into the village. Many people came out to look. After changing her clothes, Gabriella came out of her house and saw many villagers standing outside her yard. "Gabriella, you have guests? How could the Damer family have distinguished guests? They're one of the poorest families in our village." Gabriella wanted to ask the villagers to go home, but the car door was pushed open, and Jackson got out of the car before she had a chance. At this time of day, it was still bright outside, so when he came out of the car, the golden rays of light gave a golden tinge to his well-defined and handsome face, making him appear like a god from the heavens. The villagers were dumbfounded. They had never seen such a handsome and elegant man before. They had no clue that this was the silent Dusty, whom they had all looked down upon in the past. Jackson nodded at the villagers, and he motioned for the butler and bodyguards to wait in the car. He and Gabriella walked together. The villagers cleared a path for them. "They didn't treat you well in the past." Jackson looked at Gabriella's angry expression, and a trace of a smile appeared on his lips. "How did they not treat me well?" "They said mean things about you. They said that you were ugly. The children even threw stones at you, and the adults created trouble from you from time to time too. Anyway, they excluded you, and I don't like them for it." The sunlight cast mottled shadows through the branches and leaves of trees on both sides of the secluded forest path on which the two were walking. Jackson looked at the woman beside him, who was expressing discontent on his behalf, and a strange feeling surged out from his heart. Raising his slender and fair hand, he was about to pat her head affectionately, when suddenly Gabriella ran forward. She then turned around, a bright and charming smile on her face. "But that's all in the past. You are better than them now, and you're way beyond their reach. If they found out that you're Dusty, their jaws would probably drop in shock." And Gabriella was running. Her high ponytail drew a beautiful arc in the air, and when she smiled, her white and neat teeth gleamed. Her eyes curved into crescents, and her purity and beauty shone. Gabriella saw that Jackson was staring at her, and she turned her head away, raising her hand to brush off the strands of hair on her cheek. She knew that she had lost a lot of weight lately, and was worried that she didn't look good. After finishing this series of actions, she felt that maybe she was thinking too much. Jackson did not like her at all, so why would he care how she looked? Laughing at her silly thoughts, Gabriella collected herself. She continued to walk, staying a few steps away from Jackson. After walking for a while, Gabriella realized that nobody was following behind her. She looked back and saw Jackson, who had stopped in front of a big tree. Seeming to have thought of something, a trace of panic appeared on Gabriella's face. She ran toward Jackson and used her body to block the tree. The light that was shining through the branches and leaves fell on Jackson, making his eyes look even more deep. He quietly stared at Gabriella. Neither of them spoke, and there was a subtle change in the atmosphere around them. Suddenly, a thin layer of sweat appeared on the tip of Gabriella's nose. Jackson narrowed his eyes, his voice deep. "I already saw it." Gabriella's slender shoulders sagged down in an instant. The word kiss was carved into the tree, followed by the words Gabriella and Dusty. "Did I kiss you here?" he asked. Gabriella could not help thinking about that night, pulled by a long and strong arm. Before she could react, she had been pressed against the tree by his tall and firm body. She was surprised, and her mouth hung open slightly. Dusty held her tightly, and their bodies were pressed together. They could hear each other's heartbeats. "You're not allowed to get married." Dusty had said those few words, and then had lowered his head and pressed his lips against her slightly opened ones. Without giving her any time to think, he pried open her teeth and his tongue entered her mouth. That was her first kiss, so she did not even know how to breathe during it. Her legs had become so weak that she felt like she was melting. Seeing Gabriella's face turning red, Jackson let out a small cough. Gabriella broke out of her daze. She felt awkward and embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about Dusty." She clearly understood that the man in front of her was Jackson and not her Dusty. Perhaps Dusty would never come back in her lifetime. "Mr. Johnson, let's keep walking." Without waiting for Jackson to say anything, Gabriella went forward first. Jackson looked at Gabriella's slender back, and he raised his eyebrows slightly. Although there had been no one living in his house after he left, Gabriella still tidied Dusty's house for him from time to time. She had recently mowed the grass in the yard. She had even planted many flowers. When the breeze blew, there was a refreshing fragrance from the beautiful blooms. Gabriella took out the key and opened the front door. The furnishings of the room were almost the same as when Dusty had left. It was very clean and tidy. Gabriella had also recently washed the sheets, and there were clothes hanging outside drying in the warm sun. It seemed out of place for Jackson to enter this place, given his newfound status, but he did not seem to care. Although he had no memories of this place, looking at the furnishings of the house, he did have a sense of inexplicable familiarity. Looking at the simple wooden bed, an image flashed into his mind. A slender girl being pinned under him, their bodies naked as their legs entwined in heat. She was holding his broad and firm shoulders, saying softly, "Dusty, I'm scared." Jackson's head hurt, and his tall body took a few steps back, his handsome facial features scrunched up in pain. He raised his hands and pressed them against his temples, as if a sharp weapon had pierced his head. Gabriella saw that something was wrong with Jackson, and she hurried forward. "Mr. Johnson, what's wrong?" Jackson leaned against the wall, his eyes closed and his chest heaving. It took him a while to feel better. When he looked at the bed again, it seemed like there was no memory at all. Gabriella ran to the kitchen and brought out a cup of warm water, which Jackson held and took a sip while looking at Gabriella with his dark eyes. "Have I ever touched you?" Gabriella was stunned. She did not expect him to ask this, and her thin face turned bright red. "No." Jackson put down the teacup, saying nothing else. He then went outside. Gabriella saw him walk out of the yard, and she stood at the door, watching his retreating figure. So Gabriella did not chase after him. After coming back from the capital, she now understood many things. She would not hope for things that she should not hope for. Gabriella went to the kitchen to cook some food. It was her birthday today. In the past, she had spent her birthday with Dusty. This year, she was spending it alone. Gabriella thought about this time last year. She had come to Dusty's house to have dinner, and he had baked a cake for her. He had made her day so special. And when she was blowing out the candles on her cake, She had closed her eyes and wished for Dusty to accept her feelings. Dusty, last year you said that you would grant me a birthday wish on my birthday this year. You lied to me. You are never coming back, and I have no Dusty anymore. Gabriella lowered her eyes as hot tears fell down her face. What is your birthday wish? The man's deep and mellow voice suddenly floated into her ears. Gabriella's wet eyelashes fluttered, and she turned around. Seeing the man who was standing at the door, she couldn't believe her eyes. Didn't you leave? Jackson raised his hand that was holding a small suitcase. I'm planning to stay here for a night, so I went to get my luggage. So he had not left, and had instead gone to get his luggage. Gabriella did not want him to see her fragile side. She wiped at her tears and composed herself. The living conditions here are not what you're used to. I'm afraid you won't be comfortable. Jackson walked into the house and looked at Gabriella's thin face. I've already decided to stay. He pursed his lips slightly, and his eyes looking at her turned dark. What do you want for your birthday? Gabriella looked at the man's well-defined and handsome face, and she bit her lip. Can I have any birthday wish I want? Yes, tell me. Can you be my Dusty for just one day? The moment the words left her lips, Gabriella instantly regretted it. With his new life, how could he be willing to be Dusty ever again? Wasn't she just being delusional? After several seconds, it was still silent. Gabriella bit her lip as she looked at the man whose eyes were deep, his expression cold and unreadable. Just pretend I didn't say that. I understand. You're Mr. Johnson now. Before she could finish, she heard the man hum softly. Gabriella's eyes widened. What did he mean? Mr. Johnson, call me Dusty. Gabriella's mouth slightly opened, and it took her a moment to regain her senses. But Dusty does not look like this. What does he look like? Gabriella took Jackson to the bedroom. From the closet, Gabriella took out a black shirt and pants and a mask. She looked at the cold man behind her uncertainty. Dusty usually wears these things. A few minutes later, when Gabriella, who was waiting outside, heard the bedroom door open, she turned around. Tears filled her eyes when she saw the man who had changed into a thin black jacket and was wearing the mask. She had never expected that she would be able to see her Dusty ever again, let alone on her birthday. Dusty, shall we go for a walk through the mountains? Gabriella had almost forgotten that he was really a Johnson. Seeing him dressed this way instantly returned her to back when they had been at their sweetest. She ran to him and took hold of his large hand.